ask yourselves, what representation of this aspect of reality is offered by the text? For example, if you get a text about environmental issues, so what image is constructed for, or how is climate change represented? Is it represented favorably, unfavorably? Do we get an image of climate change as a hoax or as a problem? As something that some journalists have invented to attack politicians, or as a real problem that the entire world is facing? So different aspects of reality can be represented differently in different texts. And then the next question that you need to ask is, what image does the text producer represent? What image does the text producer construct for himself or herself? Somebody who's concerned about climate change, somebody who sides with environmentalists, or quite the opposite? Is this a text producer that is concerned about these issues, or quite the opposite? Is this a text producer that is aware of environmental and social problems, or quite the contrary? And you can also ask, if you get there, how the text receiver is positioned. So if I position myself as let's imagine the following: a company that sells products by making them appear environmentally friendly. Of course, the image that is constructed for the company is a very positive one. A company concerned or aware of environmental issues and committed to solving environmental problems. Then, how is the text receiver positioned? The text receiver is the potential consumer of the products of that company. Well, the text receiver would be positioned as someone who also cares about the environment. That's why you get so many advertisements these days that show this. We care about your health. Isn't Coca-Cola still selling Coca-Cola, but making Coca-Cola look healthy, when in fact we all know that it's not? But because it has become so fashionable to talk about our health, which is not a bad idea, in fact, Coca-Cola exploits the discourse of healthcare to promote products that we know are not so healthy. But, well, you know, you feel good when you drink Coca-Cola because you think, well, at least I'm not drinking some bad beverage that is bad for my health. Well, think twice. And you get also companies selling products by resorting to the discourse of environmentalism. And there is a team working on an advertisement by a company that promotes products by embracing feminist ideas. The products may not be pro or against feminism, but the thing is, the company projects an image for itself as a company that is aware and cares about social issues, and positions the text receiver as someone who is also aware and cares about women's equity. All right? That's a very, very clever strategy. Well, that applies to those texts and some imaginary texts. Now, when you go back to your texts, ask yourselves these questions. What representation of reality does this text offer? Of course, based on all the textual evidence that I have described and collected. And then, what about the image constructed for the text producer? If you can also ask yourselves, then what position is constructed for the text receiver? What the technical term is subject position. What subject position is constructed for the text receiver? What subject position is constructed for the text producer? Remember the concept subject position, guys? We talked about last class. We said genres make available subject positions. The subject position teacher, the subject position student. Okay, that is at the level of genres. But each particular text in itself can also, in turn, position the text producer and the text receiver differently. Let me give you another example. The genre lesson makes available the subject position, and you know this because this is very easy, teacher and student. Okay? Now, one particular text that belongs to the genre lesson with those subject positions that we have already described at the level of the genre. Now, one particular text of the genre lesson may establish the subject position autonomous student for students and the subject position of, I don't know, facilitator for the teacher rather than lecturer that is in control of the entire lesson. Okay? So in addition to the subject positions that you find associated with genres, in each text, you also find subject positions that each particular text constructs. So in the example of this company that sells products by appearing to be a green company, you have the subject positions made available by the genre, the seller or the promoter, and the potential consumer. Those are the subject positions associated with the genre. But then one text may position or establish the subject position of responsible company for the company that is selling the product and responsible consumer for the potential consumer, the text receiver. Is that clear, guys? Okay. Okay. So that is the order in which you should move, right? I forgot to talk about intertextuality. Okay, it's a good idea well, many teams made the effort of integrating what you had written about intertextuality 2 weeks ago with your new analysis. You fused them. That's good. Those who didn't, try to do that for the future assignments, okay? And at which point would you talk about intertextuality? Well, in my opinion, you should consider intertextuality after you have described smaller things, like after linguistic resources, after rhetorical resources, after interactional mechanisms. You could consider intertextuality when you talk about discourse representation, because that is a kind of intertextual relationship. So if you find other kinds of intertextual relations, you consider it together with or next to discourse representation. And then genre. At which point of your analysis it's a good idea to talk about genres. You can do it at the very beginning of your report and say, this text belongs to the genre X because, and you provide evidence. Or you can do all the analysis, and then at the end, you say, taking into consideration all the things we've described, we can argue that this text belongs to the genre, whatever. Okay? So you choose. All right. That is to give you more ideas, to show you how that paper about strategic political communication was so important and why it was at the beginning of the unit. Because that you will need to go back to it because, like we said, it's a model that you can follow for your analysis. Okay? Another thing I'd like to say is, remember, guys, that as analysts, we cannot make claims about the intentions or purposes or desires of text producers. So before you turn in your following assignment, go through the text that you've written and make sure you don't have those expressions such as this is used in order to, or the text producer uses this in order to, or this is used to do this or that. Okay? Just describe functions or effects. For example, this pronoun has the effect of, or the use of passive voice in this text has the function of, whatever. Okay? Now, last but not least, there is a concept that people in the evening group asked a question about last week. And nobody in the morning group asked any question about this, if I remember rightly. And it's an important concept because you find it quite often in the reading materials. You are expected to apply it. And some teams have applied it correctly and some not so much. The concept is the concept of voice. Voz. Okay? The concept of voice is applied in a very wide manner. We can talk about what we mean by voice is the manifestation of someone. That is the most easy, that's the easiest way to understand it. So when you're talking about, for example, discourse representation, you may say, in this text, I can detect that the voice of Greta Thunberg, a famous activist, has been incorporated. So what you're saying is something that Greta has expressed has been taken from a text and included in a new text. Okay? In that sense, we can talk about the voice of one concrete individual, Greta or any other person. Okay? But you can also think of voice as the manifestation of a group, not just an individual. A group that is defined by a particular common interest, for example, environmental activists. So you can also talk about the voice of environmental activists, the voice of women, not just one particular woman. And you can be more specific and you can say, in this text, we can detect that the voice of feminist women has been incorporated. Okay, so you can also associate voice with groups. All right? Do you follow me so far? Yeah. Okay. Now, in addition to that, notice how we talked about Greta and an imaginary group of feminist activists. You can argue that these people exist, the subjects exist outside a text. All right? So their voice is expressed or incorporated in a text. Now, there are some subjects that exist only in the text. For example, the character of a story. Like, let me give you a very ridiculous example so that you understand what I mean that a subject exists in the text. Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood exists in a text. And what is Little Red Riding Hood? She's a character in a story. Characters are subjects that exist in a text, and you call them textual subjects, as opposed to subjects that exist in the real world and are made of flesh and bones. Okay? Characters and other textual subjects, like, for example, today we're going to talk about opponents and proponents. Opponents are the proponent is the textual subject that defends a thesis. And the opponent is the textual subject that attacks a thesis. Opponents and proponents are textual subjects. So they also have a voice. They are not flesh and bone human beings. They are subjects that exist in the text. Well, you can say, well, but Gema can be an opponent. And Gema has flesh and bone. Yes, true. But in a given text, in a particular text, she would be in the capacity of the attacker of a thesis. So she, in that text, she is opponent. And then in a different text, she can be proponent. That's why these are textual subjects. These are categories of textual subjects. And textual subjects can have a voice. That's why you can say that the voice of the proponent is expressed, and then the voice of the opponent is challenged, and the voice of a character is manifested in a text. Okay? And then, so we have moved from concrete individuals to concrete groups, and now we are considering things that are abstract, textual subjects. They are abstract in the sense that their existence is in the text, or they are constituted in the text. And then we can move on to things that are more abstract, like ways of seeing the world, perspectives. Like, I'm being a little bit repetitive, but I think it helps. Feminism, like environmentalism. So you can talk about the voice of feminism in the sense of the feminist perspective, the discourse of feminism, or the environmentalist perspective. So in some texts, you can hear that the voice of feminism resonates. And in some texts, even though the person may say, I'm very feminist, I'm all in favor of women's rights, but still you can hear the voice of chauvinism somewhere in the background. Okay, so the concept of voice can be very, like I said, widely applied. Question?
Yes. Hi, Javier.
Yeah, just a second. I see a question
okay.
in the chat. I'm trying to read it first. Antonella Picca.
Yes, it was me. I asked the question because what you were explaining about the opponents and proponents, that you said that they were textual subjects.
Yeah.
My question was that is this concept related to what you had explained before about the position of the text producer and the text receiver?
That is subject positions. Those are subject positions. What I explained before, when I was talking about the subject positions that are made available by the genre and the subject positions that are constructed by
yes, but
text. But these are different things. These are figures, figuras, que existen en un texto. I'm sure you read Carranza's paper about narratives and argumentation. There is an example in which a Latino male is telling the researcher a story about how he was abused by a police officer. Do you remember that, Antonella? Antonella? Yeah, okay. So, in that particular text, there are characters. There is the police officer, there is the protagonist of the story, this Latino young man, and then the police officer who is the antagonist. Protagonist and antagonist exist inside the world that is created by the text, what we call the story world. Okay? It's like the world that is created by the text, The Lord of the Rings, or I don't know what movie or series is famous among you guys now. Stranger Things? No, that's old-fashioned already. Which one do you like? The Simpsons. That's classic. Okay, so in the story world of The Simpsons, you get figures that are textual subjects in the sense that they exist there. They are constituted by the text. As the text is being produced, they exist, right? Homer, Bart, Marge, etc., all the crew. Okay? Subject position is different. Subject position, the subject positions associated with a genre are the roles that the genre make available, like cartoonist and reader. Matt Granger is in the role or in the subject position cartoonist. And all the people that bought the comics, because you know that The Simpsons, before being a TV cartoon, they were a comic strip. All the readers that bought and consumed the comic strip of The Simpsons, they were the readers. Okay, those are subject positions. Nothing to do with characters. Okay? Okay, Martina, now your turn.
Yes, when you were speaking about how voices of movements and not specific people are incorporated, I was thinking about the text we used for intertextual relations, and it is a tweet of a guy who mocks women of the Me Too movement because he uses like the same structure of their women's accusations. I mean, he says, this person groped me, 30 years ago and sort of mocks the way women accuse men of abuse in the Me Too movement. So in that case, we can say, can we say that the voices of the Me Too movement are incorporated in the text and are mocked?
Okay, yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh, okay, great.
Attacked and yeah.
Because we had written, I think that the problem was the way we expressed it, because we said that the tweet was intertextually related to the voices of the Me Too movement. And that was wrong.
Right. You can say that the text incorporates echoes or mocks or parodies the voice of, but because voice is not a text, you cannot say that a text is intertextually related to voice.
Great.
A text can be intertextually related to a text.
Perfect. Now it's clear. Thank you.
Okay. All right, guys. Having made these comments about your work, your next step will be to edit your work, taking into consideration all the feedback that you have received or that you will receive very shortly. If you haven't, go ahead and fuse what you wrote about intertextuality and what you wrote for this second assignment. And because now we're going to deal with narrative and argumentation, you will incorporate more concepts to go on analyzing your own text, okay? But for next week, you will not have to write more analysis of your own text. You will work on different things, okay? So you take a 1 week break from your text of choice, all right? We need to make sure that you acquire more concepts so that you can apply them to your own texts. So in the meantime, your homework, I'm anticipating a little bit this, but your homework will be a series of activities of analysis of our own texts, okay? So let me round off a few things that we need to say about genres now. Let's go back to the topic of last week. Are there questions about the concept of genre before we move on?
Hi, I don't have a question related to genre, but it is related to what we saw last week and this week. I don't understand how to define interactional mechanisms. I understand the examples we have, like back-channeling behavior, etc. And I know it has the word interaction in it, but I'm guessing in text where there is only one text producer and text receivers are not involved, how is there interaction?
You mean that,
or will there only be interaction when there are more than several speakers, let's say?
Yeah, well, basically that's it. You would get interactional features that get exploited, that are used in text that are interactional, like the text that we worked on in Unit 1, like interviews, conversations, lessons. You had lots of examples of cross-examination or examination in chief in trials, or business interactions over the phone, etc. All right. However, there are some texts that are written, and there are some texts that are apparently monological that may still exploit some interactional mechanisms for an effect. For example, can you think of any that could be exploited to involve the text receiver and induce them into reasoning along your own reasoning? Exactly. So, questions that typically have an interactional effect, and that you could find them listed in your interactional mechanisms list. They can appear in other texts that are not necessarily interactional, and they have a particular effect in that particular text. And you can find advertisements, for example. I'm talking about advertisements because they tend to be the most creative and innovative kind of texts. But you can find advertisements that exploit mechanisms that are interactional. So your original question was, how can I know what interactional mechanisms are? Well, you know that linguistic features are features that belong to the linguistic system, like pronouns, vocabulary, voice, everything that is to do with the grammar, morphology. And then interactional mechanisms are mechanisms that are to do with the synchrony of interaction, like interruptions, like back-channeling behavior, like nominating the topic. Like when I say, okay, now we're going to talk about genres, that is, I used a mechanism to control the direction of where we are going from now on, and I guarantee for myself a long turn at talk. There are also mechanisms that are to do with turns assignments. Do you understand that, Azul?
Yes.
You see how I assigned you the turn through a question? So, all these things that are to do with who talks next, about what, when, all these things that are to do with sending the signal that the channel of interaction is open, or that somebody is taking control of the direction of interaction, all those are interactional mechanisms. Okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay, guys, so last class we discussed the concept of genre at length. But still, okay, there's a question by Cecilia.
Hello. I have a question about intertextual gap.
Okay.
If it is evident in a text, if we have to analyze a text, we can see in the surface of the text that intertextual gap.
Well, what you could see in the text, in the actual text, is a number of different features that can make you say, this text is very typical of the genre X, or this is atypical, or not so atypical, or not so typical, because intertextual gap, the gap, is a matter of degree. Okay, so you can find that some texts are close to other texts that are typical text of that genre. Or you may find a text that is not so close, not so close, not so close, or that is very far away from, or very distant from, distant in the sense of different from the typical canonical text of a given genre. Okay, so what you need to take into consideration is, of course, the text that you are analyzing, and then your experience and your knowledge of the given genre that you're considering. Okay, you know what a typical novel is.
Yes.
But then when you read, what's the name of the famous novel by Cortázar? Rayuela. When you read Rayuela, you can tell, oh, this is far from typical. But you're comparing Rayuela with your experience of other novelas and your knowledge of what other typical novelas are like.
In the case of the advertisement that you showed us last class, is there an intertextual gap? Because it was an ad, but it also has, you can see the medical prescription genre.
Yeah. What's your opinion?
I think that it's a mixture between genres, but
well, it's not a mixture. It's not a fusion.
No, not a fusion.
Because you were able to say, you were able to tell that is an advertisement.
Yes, a combination of genres, maybe.
Right, and it incorporates some elements of another genre. Okay, so yes, it's true, they are combined, but you can tell that it's not, you're not in doubt when you see that. Is this a medical prescription really? No, you know it's an ad.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
But what's your opinion about that? What can you answer your own question?
I think that there is not an intertextual gap, because I am sure that it's an ad, and it has typical elements of the advertisement, of the genre of advertisement. So
okay. What about the rest of the class? This is an interesting question, because ads are so
creative
that it's like you're ready to expect like anything, right?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe it's not the typical ad that tells you this show starts at and finishes at, and you can find it on this radio station, and the anchor is Ginsburg. There is a twist there, because instead of getting that, what you get is dosis, una toma a la tarde. So that is a little bit deviant, right?
Yes, yes. So how can I describe that intertextual gap?
Well, because of what I've just said, I would argue that it's not a typical advertisement.
Okay.
But on the other hand, I need to admit that being so open for innovation, the genre advertisement is so open to innovations. This is not a flamboyant and extravagant ad. It's not that atypical, because in advertising we are ready to expect mixtures.
Okay.
So there is a gap, but it's not a huge gap, in my opinion.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Javier.
Okay. Sophia, you have a question?
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
My question is, because Cecilia said that there is an intertextual gap. I mean, the intertextual gap is always there, right?
That's true.
It is not that a text has or doesn't have an intertextual gap. It is always
with
there.
Other texts.
Yeah, exactly. And it depends. I mean, you have to compare text in order to know what the gap is, but it is always there.
Right. So it can be a large gap or a smaller gap.
Yeah, right. That was my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Lourdes, you have a question.
Hello, good morning. I have two questions. One is related to expression. You said that you can say that the text is marginal or prototypical, or a genre is marginal or prototypical? A text, right?
The text, exactly, the text.
Okay, that's one question. And the other question is, can any text producer can innovate and create marginal texts, or the text producer has to be in a position of power to do this innovations to create marginal texts?
Okay, that's a conceptual question. It's very close to an exam kind of question. So I let you answer that question. Take the privilege of making the effort to answer the question yourself.
I think that the text producer has to be in a position of power to make these innovations because, but I don't know how to justify the answer. But yes, I think it is. It had to be. It has to be in a position of power.
He or she, right?
He or she.
Yeah, that's correct because well, on some occasions you can think of power, but on some other occasions, power is not so much involved, or your power, between inverted commas, derives from the prestige that somebody has in a particular institution or in a particular field of activity. Okay, there are differences again, and it's a little bit dangerous to make generalizations because there are some genres, like we said last class, that make very little or almost no room for innovations, like the genre birth certificate, right? But in some other genres, like advertisements, even the text producers that are not so very well known, porque no pertenecen a las grandes agencias, they can stretch the boundaries of genres. But then in other genres, what you normally get is that the innovation in the production of a text that belongs to a given genre can reveal how the text producer is positioned within an institution or within a social field. And the fact that they produce innovative texts strengthens their position as very important figures in that institution or in that social field, right? And you can look around and see what, for example, teachers that are junior or that are getting their first steps into the profession, they normally sort of stick to the conventions of what lessons are, and teachers that are senior, that have some prestige and that can take risks, well, they normally, not necessarily always, but normally would tend to do things that are more innovative. And this goes to other things that are not necessarily genres also. Okay,
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Francisca, she has a question. When you say another genre is incorporated, is that the same as saying that X genre is embedded in X genre? Yeah, the thing is that in the example we saw last class, what we observed was that some generic conventions of one genre, the medical prescription, were incorporated in a text that belongs to a different genre. Okay? Now, a different thing would be to say that a text that belongs to the genre joke is embedded in, está incrustado en, embedded in a genre, a text that belongs to the genre lesson. And that can be the case. I'm sure you've you've had teachers that told jokes in the middle of the class. So they interrupted the class, they would tell a joke and then move on. Pero no hacer una bromita o un chiste con un juego de palabras, sino parar y contar un chiste de gallegos en el medio de la clase. Okay, so that is the case of a text that belongs to the genre chiste de gallego in a text that belongs to the genre lesson. Okay, Melina, you have a question.
Yes, hi.
Well, by the way,
we analyzed.
Francisca, notice all the possible combinations of genres that can potentially exist, and they are described and exemplified by Carranza. And she also admits that there are other possible combinations that she hasn't considered. Okay? So, Melina, go ahead.
Yes, well, we analyzed an ad, and when we analyzed rhetorical figures, we were wondering if including videos would be considered an image, or if it is only the act of like portraying images through language. We didn't have that clear.
I would have to see the text. Who corrected your
I think we didn't get the feedback yet.
Okay, and what is the ad?
It is the one at Nike that we sent you beforehand.
I did get the
All right.
feedback.
Yeah?
Yeah, I've sent it.
Okay, I will check it
Okay,
now
so
again.
your question is the incorporation of images in the ad? Well, actually, it's not that images are incorporated as if you're taking them from one thing and inserting it in a text. It's the ad itself, the text itself is multimodal because it's made up of images and words. Okay? So
Okay, and shall we?
Yeah, the thing is, I understand it's food for thought at some point, because the images are the ones from historical events. So they could be texts that took place in another time. Do you know what I mean? Because they are actually the real ones. They're not.
Pero eran textos que ocurrieron o acontecimientos históricos.
No, they were events.
No.
Okay. So they wouldn't be.
The thing is that you have the images where the texts are produced. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
It's it is confusing. I thought about them as events, but now that Melina is reconsidering this idea of texts, if you think of them as the text produced at that right moment where they are celebrating, for example, or where they are talking, well, but the thing is, not the whole text is incorporated, but the image where the text takes place, but not the real voices.
Okay, so that we should include that among the rhetorical figures. That's my question.
No, because those are not rhetorical resources.
Okay, that was my question. We didn't know if that was a rhetorical figure or not. Okay.
No.
Now I get it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, guys. Then what we were saying about genres last week, we got to a point at which we had to consider how genres reveal something or construct or transform relationships between social groups. There is an entire section in the paper about relationships between groups. So what you need to start thinking about is, do all social groups in a community, like our community, have equal access to all genres, or are there some genres that are typically associated with certain social groups in the role of producers. And there are some social groups that are typically associated with some genres in the role or in the subject position of consumers. Think about what may the consequences be of having access to genres that are prestigious in a community. Of course, if you're the producer of texts that belong to prestigious genres in a community, that helps you, that transfers some of the prestige of the genre to you. You can also think about that the other way around. Why are some genres more prestigious than others in a community? Is it because of the nature of the genre itself, or because of the groups, the social groups associated with those genres? Now, we said last class that through genres, institutions restrict and shape the behavior of the members of those institutions by assigning subject positions. And we talked about subject positions 5 minutes ago. Now, genres can be associated with certain social groups that can be defined by occupation. For example, the social group judge, which is discussed at length or that is part of the examples in the paper. But you can also think of other social groups defined by occupation, like teachers, like translators, like cartoneros, like colectiveros, etc. But you can also think of social groups defined by age, like teenagers, young adults, middle-aged adults, senior citizens. And you can think of the association of certain genres with different age groups, right? Social groups can also be defined by gender, sociological gender, right? Now, the different subject positions that are inherent to a given genre can be associated with different social groups. For example, consider the genre, a genre that is typical of our culture, piropo. What social group is typically associated with the subject position piropeador? And which social group is typically associated with exactly the subject position piropeada or piropeado? It's usually piropeada, the object of the piropo, the object of the so-called compliment, okay? So the social groups that are involved in a given relationship, a relationship between men and women, right? There is a particular characteristic to this relationship between men and women, because it's usually men who, in our culture, have the prerogative of saying something about a woman's body in public without being censored or without being punished, and much on the contrary, being celebrated by others, right? So that reveals something about the relationship that holds between different gender groups in our culture, right? That tells you something about how men are in a position of dominance in relation to women, because, like I said, it's usually men who in public make comments that can be, on some occasions, even vulgar about women's bodies, right? The recurrent association of a particular social group with the subject position piropeador and the recurrent association of a social group with the subject position object of the piropo may lead to those associations being naturalized, in the sense that you see that as normal. You don't see anything wrong with that. You see that as the way things have always been and will always be. So that recurrent association of social group with a particular subject position in a genre may have the effect of reproducing the same relationship between men and women, a relationship which is characterized by dominance. Of course, the good thing about these things is that that relationship can also be transformed, and it doesn't happen overnight, but some form of resistance to being placed in the subject position, objeto de piropo, can eventually, with its repetition, can eventually have the effect of reverting, well, or at least challenging that social relationship that exists between men and women, okay? The paper that you read discusses how people from the higher social classes and people from the lower social classes are related, and how the genres that belong to the judiciary field or the institution tribunales, how those genres perpetuate this relationship of dominance between the higher social classes and the lower social classes. But you can also apply this same meaning to other cases, like I showed you, right? Now, the other important concept here is the concept of ecology of genres. But that's a very easy concept to understand because we're actually using a metaphor here. You understand what is involved in an ecology, right? In ecology. What do you find? Se habla mucho de una ecología de medios ahora. De medios audiovisuales, de medios multimedia, de medios tradicionales. So, why do we talk about an ecology of genres? Or what do we mean by an ecology of genres? Milagros Monte, any idea? Milagros? Oriana, I know you will know. Oriana Vercellone or Barcelone. Oriana, are you there? Sofía, no. Sofía, no. Any clue, guys? María Agustina Carranza.
Yes, I'm here, but I don't understand the concept that much. I mean, I think it's related to, I don't know, to the structure, but no, I don't understand the concept.
No. Luz Alonso, what about you?
I'm not quite sure.
Okay, make the effort. Come on.
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. What do you understand by an ecology of genres? How could you explain that in your own words? Why do we talk about an ecology of genres? Not a set, un conjunto, but an ecology. What ideas come to your mind when you think of ecology?
I don't know, about maybe connections between genres.
Excellent. Excellent.
Oh, okay.
Can you elaborate on what kind of connections there can be between genres?
I don't know, maybe connections between the kind of, I don't know, activities involved in a genre or conveyed by a genre.
When you think of ecology, Luz, does
Yes.
the word diversity come to your mind? Multiplicity come to your mind? Coexistence?
Yes, of course.
How so? How come?
I mean, when I think of ecology, I think about the way things connect, or
okay, because they coexist in a particular environment.
Yes.
So there are interrelationships between things.
Yes.
In an ecology, there are some, for example, some living organisms that are dependent on some other living organism. And there may be two living organisms that may compete for the same food. So they struggle,
Yes.
and because they need the same, they need to occupy the same spot. All right.
Yes.
Maybe one of those may win out. All right. Some
Yes.
living organisms join or come into the environment, some others leave, etc. Right? Well, this metaphor of the ecology of genre, well, it's not a metaphor, it's a technical term, but it's based on this metaphor. Also captures the idea that in a community, there are relationships of all sorts between genres. Some genres, some new genres may compete with other traditional and well-established genres. They come into, they clash, they may come into conflict with others. There may be genres that disappear, new genres that come up. Okay, and the idea is that genres are interrelated in an ecology of genres in many different ways. Luz, I can see your face now.
Yes.
Okay, do you understand that then?
Yes, I do.
Okay, you've got a bit of a flu or just cold?
Sorry, what?
You seem to be going through some flu, or
No,
is it
no.
just the cold weather?
Yes, the cold weather. I'm freezing.
Okay, okay. All right, guys. Any question? Saida, yeah, sure. Well, you have examples there in the paper too. Notice how WhatsApp message, the genre WhatsApp message, has been struggling for some time with the genre SMS, and then is winning the battle. Has been competing for a niche, por un nicho, with that genre, and displacing one genre is displacing the other. But you can also think of the genre press conference and the genre official announcement, and how in recent Argentine history there has been like a competition between those two genres, because we had a president for several years that didn't offer any press conference but only made official announcements via what we used to call cadena nacional. And then there are other presidents that opted for the genre press conference rather than for the other genre. So there are all sorts of, there can be competition between genres in a community, for example. Elisa, you have a question.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to ask if this idea of the ecology of genres and throughout this process, can we say that the intertextual, how we see intertextual gap changes somehow? I mean, when we talk about this, I don't know if talking about merging or this idea of some genres displacing others or combining characteristics of one or another genre. Well, I was wondering if this can make these atypical genres more typical somehow throughout time.
Ah, okay.
I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
Well, in principle, there seems to be a mixture of ideas, but I see where you're headed at. So let's work our way through this. Intertextual gap is, as the text says, it is to do with a relationship between texts that belong to the same genre. Okay? And when we're talking about an ecology of genres, what we're considering is relationships, or how genres in a community are related to one another, or how they can be potentially related to one another. So we're talking about different things, right? But I see your point. You're concerned with how innovations that are incorporated into a text or several texts can eventually lead to the transformation of a genre.
Yes.
Okay. So it's impossible to say that one innovation in one genre changes the genre. What usually occurs is that one particular innovation may be adopted by several text producers, and the same innovation may be produced in many texts in many different instantiations of the genre, and the cumulative effect of repeating the same innovation by different text producers, that can eventually stretch the boundaries of the genres. That eventually changes our expectations about a given genre. So that slightly modifies a genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean...
When I asked this question, I was thinking about this example from the previous class in which you showed us this advertisement, which had the characteristics of another genre, this particular advertisement. And then I was thinking how probably many years ago, this was kind of unthinkable even within advertisement. That's why, and I meant a process of a lot of years. I probably didn't make myself clear, but eventually, as you said, probably it may produce a change somehow.
Exactly. Guys, you were born in a at a historical time in which the advertisements don't tell you explicitly what the product contains or doesn't contain, or what the product's attributes are. For example, in the past, you would get an advertisement for a car saying, this car can travel at 200 km per hour. It only uses 10 liters of gas per 100 miles or whatever, and it can sit 7 people, whatever, and all the pictures of the car here and there. What you get now is something like Nissan, a life experience of the new generation. So what about the car? Well, but the thing is that has been the change that has been more noticeable in advertisements. The almost inexistent mentioning of the attributes of the product itself, but a promotion of the company as environmentally friendly, concerned about feminism, or offering experiences, sensory experiences, and worlds of dream and luxury, whatever. Okay, so that transformation took many, many, many years, definitely, as you said. Maybe at the beginning, an ad that didn't mention anything about the car was an innovation. And now it's the ordinary ad, right? Because we have come to expect that sort of very creative, sort of musical video clip ad on the TV, but you have no clue about what the car does. Yeah, definitely. And okay. The genre lesson, as you said, the genre lesson has been undergoing changes constantly lately, definitely. Okay, guys. Let's do something. There is a question that you should think about for next class. The question is, what is the difference between the concept text type and the concept genre? That question will force you to pay close attention to the paper, even to the footnotes of the paper. Okay? I know what I'm telling you. And then, of course, you need to think about why one of those two concepts is preferred over the other. Of course, you can guess which one is preferred over the other. In this course, we have been talking about genres, but not text types. Sophia, you have a question.
Yeah, sorry, I was taking the notes. My question is regarding to the ecology of genre, because you said that there are interrelationship between genres, and I thought that it was only a relationship of conflict or of competence, because of what Carranza said. Right. What would be another type of interrelation, for example? I mean, not considering competence or conflict.
Well, there are relationships of complementation, if that is the correct way of expressing it, because there are genres that are in a given institution. Some activities involve producing texts of a certain genre and not others, and then a different activity can involve producing texts of a different genre and not others. For example, I'm thinking about the genres that texts of different genres that are produced at the School of Languages. There are, for some things, for example, establishing a work relationship between teacher and institution, you need a genre, contrato. But for other activities, or for a different activity like deciding which teacher will be hired, you need text of a different genre, the genre CV, the genre interview. Okay, so a genre within the institution, there are genres that occupy a particular niche, so to put it, that are associated with certain roles and activities, and other genres are to do with a different activity within the same institution. So they complement one another, the genre CV, interview, and contract.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. All right, guys. Let's take a 10-minute break. When we come back, you'll do a little bit of work yourselves, okay? So 10 minutes from now, all right? Okay, guys, all right. Listen, what you're gonna do now is, thank you for responding. What you're gonna do now is go to the virtual classroom. You're gonna find a questionnaire on narrative. So in order to answer those questions, you need to have studied the papers on narrative. Start working on that and pay close attention to the feedback that you get to each answer, both correct answers and incorrect answers. You pay close attention to the feedback because there are some explanations. When you finish the questionnaire, well, actually, I should say, as you're doing the questionnaire, see if you have questions that come up, if you have any doubt, and when you finish it, you come back to this general session, and I can take some minutes to answer questions and clear doubts. Okay, Saida, you have a question now.
Yes, hello. I wanted to know if there's an estimated date for the exam, for the term test, and how many classes do we have left before moving on with Unit 3, so I can organize myself.
I can make that calculation while you work.
Okay.
And about the estimated date, it's in the syllabus, or in the chrono. It should be published on the web because we were asked to send the chronogramma. So supposedly that should be on the web, but I'll tell you anyway. Okay, don't worry. So you can start working now. Let's take 15 minutes for you to work on that questionnaire. Okay. Aldana, yes, you're talking about the activity that you turned in last week. I said at the beginning of the class today that there are teams that haven't received feedback yet, and they will. Okay? Okay, 15 minutes, guys. All right, guys. After you've done this questionnaire, are there questions that you have about the questionnaire itself? Any of the explanations, any of the answers that were probably doubtful or confusing? Or what you read about narratives in the papers? Okay, that's good. Go ahead.
Hi, I don't understand the difference between proponent and opponent and protagonist and antagonist.
Okay, so the antagonist and the protagonist and the antagonist are figures that you find in the world of a narrative. For example, if you consider any story that you read when you were children, or I don't know, a movie or a book like The Lord of the Rings, you find the protagonist, who is the character, the main character that performs the most important actions, or the protagonist can also be the character to whom the most important events occur. And then the antagonist is the figure in the story world that is the figure that is somehow against the protagonist, or that that performs the actions that mean an obstacle to the protagonist. Okay, these are two very simple concepts that you're already, or that we expect you should be familiar with, because they are used in this technical sense just as we use them in our everyday language, right? When you watch a movie, you can tell who the protagonist is, the main character, and then the antagonist, the bad guys who are against the protagonist, right? And then proponent and opponent are figures that are to do with argumentation. So the proponent is the figure, or the voice, if you will, as I explained in the previous period, a figure that defends a thesis. And the figure that attacks or counters, or that is against that thesis, is the opponent. Okay? Now, the thing is that there are narratives in which the protagonist and the antagonist have a verbal confrontation. There are narratives in which the protagonist and the antagonist produce arguments to defend their own thesis. So in addition to being a protagonist, the same figure can be the proponent of an argument, in the sense that the character defends an argumentative position. And then some other character can be the opponent of that. Do you see that, Celeste?
Yes.
Okay. Maria Agustina has a question here. She has a question regarding the questionnaire. Question 5. Which of the following expressions are you more likely to find as an abstract to a story? And you chose B. Let's see, question 5.
The answer B to question 5 was the most amazing thing happened to me yesterday, and that's the one I chose. And then
okay, and
there's one more.
Option C is also another option. I once had a close call.
Okay, so that the feedback means that both are correct?
Yeah, the one that you wouldn't expect in the abstract at all is, and that's it. Where do you typically find, and that's it?
At the end of the narrative.
Right, yeah, and in, what do you call that section that comes at the very end?
Coda?
The coda. Exactly. Coda in Latin means cola, like la cola de un perro. So coda is what you find at the end of everything. And that's it. I don't have anything else to say about this, all right? Okay, another question here. Okay, there was an example like Maria Soledad. Excellent. Yara, you have a question.
Yes, it's about question 10 that asks which of the following answers were an optional section of stories. And I wanted to know why the abstract is an optional section.
You can tell the story of personal experience without producing an abstract. That's all. What you need in a fully developed story of personal experience is the beginning, the middle, and the end. This the orientation, the complicating action, and the resolution. All the other structural components can be produced or not. But the thing is that whether they are produced or not is most of the times influenced by in which situation you're telling the story, who your audience is, whether you need to compete for the floor or not, whether you need to make sure that you get the attention of your audience or not. For example, if you go to the police station to report a crime, chances are you're not going to have the chance to produce an abstract because the police officer will not wait for you to say, no sabe, oficial, lo que me acaba de pasar, me pegué el susto más terrible de mi vida. They couldn't care less. They will just have you in, tell you to sit down and say, ¿qué le pasó? So you just launch the story without producing an abstract. You don't need to compete for the floor with other interlocutors to tell a story of personal experience in that case. But if you're having a conversation with many friends and it's difficult to get the floor because your friends talk a lot, it would be a good idea to say something like, y no saben lo que me acaba de pasar. Because that abstract can function, if it's efficient, it can function as an indication for the interlocutors that you wish to tell something that is worth listening to, so that they give up their right to talk and they grant you a very, very long turn to talk. Okay? And in both cases, in the police station and with your friends, you can produce a story of personal experience. In one case with an abstract, and in the other case without an abstract. And sometimes with your friends, you may just launch the story without the abstract. I'm sure you've had the experience of friends that are telling one story after the other. So you tell a story about something, and then somebody else has a similar story, and they produce a story right after you, and then there's another story that is related to it. And some of these stories may come one after the other without an abstract, because we all understand that the following story is connected to the preceding one. And still that counts as a story, because you have the middle, the beginning, the middle, and the end.
It's clear now. Thank you.
Okay. Valeria, I didn't understand the difference between action and phenomenon in question 2. Okay. Valeria, when we talk about actions, we talk about things that some agent carries out. For example, picking up the baby or crying. By phenomenon, in this particular question, I meant something that happened spontaneously without the intervention of an agent, like raining. It rains, and well, llueve. No es que hay alguien que llueve. My point by asking that question was showing you that what counts as narrative is a sequence of actions that are performed by an agent that has a goal. La lluvia llueve porque se da así, no es que hay alguien que se dirige a una meta, entonces decide, ahora voy a llover. That's it. So on some occasions you may find sequences of verbs, but they don't denote actions by an agent. So you need to make the difference between what sequence of actions is a story or what constitutes a narrative and what doesn't. Okay? Aldana says, I have a question. Are the antagonist and the protagonist figures as well as proponent and opponent figures? Yes. Yes, they are, Aldana. All of them are textual subjects. Antagonist, protagonist, on the one hand, they are to do with the actions in a narrative, and then proponent and opponent, which are to do with argumentation. When argumentation occurs in a story, then you get both, as I explained to Azul. The protagonist and antagonist may, in addition, be opponent and proponent. Okay, Maria Eugenia. Are virtual events the same as imaginary events? Yes, they are. Eugenia. Virtual in the sense that they didn't occur in our quote-unquote reality, in that sense. Okay, guys. And how did you do in the rest of the questions? Looks like most of the questions were okay. Sophia, you have a question.
Yeah, I don't quite understand the concept of tellability. Okay. I know that something is worth telling and that it is reportable, but I don't know if that's all.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
And how do you know when a story is tellable or not? I mean,
well, usually stories that are tellable are those that the text producer thinks is gonna be about something unusual and that can be interesting for the audience. Things that are, the word will not come to me, ordinary, too common, and things that are boring are usually not very tellable. And if something is not tellable, some good storytellers make them tellable because they are such good storytellers that they tell the story in such a way that they make it very entertaining and worth paying attention to and interesting and worth listening to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Lautaro. Okay, you understood the feedback. Magali, you have a question. Are free clauses always present in a narrative? Well, by free clauses, you mean clauses that are not part of the, so to put it, skeleton of the sequence of actions. So, for example, a clause in which the storyteller evaluates an action or evaluates a protagonist. They are not always present in a narrative. They are not, let me put it like this, they are not a requisite for something to count as a narrative. And you had an example in the questionnaire. I picked up the baby cried. There's no free clause there, and that counts as a narrative. Now, what you usually find in real life is narratives, or more specifically, stories of personal experience that do contain lots and lots and lots of free clauses that that have that function of expressing a commentary by the text producer on what he or she is telling. Paulina. Guys, I'm sorry, Paulina, I'm going to say this because now I see your comment, but this is a correction for many people. When you want to get the attention of your interlocutor, for example, to ask a question, instead of, you don't have to say sorry because you haven't done anything wrong. What you say is, excuse me, right? That's a language correction. I hope it helps everybody because that shows also your command of the language, all right? So, Paulina, the question is, are reportability and tellability interchangeable terms? I don't remember if they are used interchangeably. Can you direct me to the page number, please, so that I'm able to tell you? Page. .556. Okay. From what I'm reading here in this paragraph, Paulina, that seems to be the case. It seems to be that reportability and tellability are being used as near synonyms in this paragraph, at least. Okay, guys. To recapitulate, what you need to make sure you understand in relation to narrative is, first, that the concept narrative is like a term that denotes a discourse mode, because narrative in itself can become manifest. The narrative mode can become manifest or can appear in different texts. It would be a mistake to say this text is narrative, meaning this text is purely narrative. Because usually what you get is that texts have some parts that are narrative, some parts that are argumentative, some parts that have descriptions, etc., etc. So what we're going to concentrate on is the narrative discourse mode and the argumentative discourse mode. There are texts in which what is narrative predominates. And there are genres that are basically narrative in that sense. One of those genres is the genre that we call story of personal experience, or story for short. So story is essentially a narrative text, a narrative in which the narrative discourse mode predominates. There are other texts in which the narrative mode predominates too. For example, in sports commentary, el relato de un relator de fútbol. That is narrative because the guy is mentioning what action follows what other action and one action after another action after another action, okay? But those are so boring that we're not going to pay attention to them. There are narratives about hypothetical events, and we call them, they are different from stories, and we call them narratives about hypothetical events. That's not a difficult name. And you also have narratives about habitual events. That's the name we give to that other narrative, which is different from the genre story too. Okay? Now, when we concentrate on stories of personal experience, we notice what Labov and other linguists discovered, that fully fledged stories tend to have a given structure. And when we consider the structural components of stories, they tend to share the same constitutive parts and some optional structural components, okay? Normally, we're not going to be interested in your detecting whether this is the abstract or the complicating action. And as you will see in one of the activities that you're going to have as homework, we tell you what the orientation is. And we will ask you only to detect the complicating action. What is more important to us is the narrative elements. And these are very easy. We have named a couple of them already. The narrative elements are protagonist and antagonist, that is the characters. Then the conflict that the protagonist and antagonist face, and the sequence of actions. All right? Those are the narrative elements. Now, what is the conflict? The conflict is a clash or a crash between opposing forces. For example, somebody mentioned The Lord of the Rings in an example above. In The Lord of the Rings, the conflict is the struggle between good and evil. Simple as that. Okay. In one of the narratives that you read as examples, the conflict was the prejudiced ideas of one of the characters versus the less prejudiced or open-minded ideas, or how can I put it? The diverse oriented ideas of the other character. Okay, so when you think of conflict, think of two opposing forces colliding. Don't think of one single action. The conflict in The Lord of the Rings is not that Bilbo found a ring. That's one action. The conflict is to do with the opposition between good and evil. Okay? So when you think about conflict, you need to abstract something from the story itself. You will not find the conflict formulated in an utterance in the story itself. Okay? You need to interpret that, derive it from the story. Cecilia, you have a question.
But in the example that we read, could be that the conflict was prejudice between two different minority groups? Because
yeah.
So the forces are the two different minority groups, but
the forces are the two different prejudices that each one holds against the other. For example.
Okay.
Or denying the identity of the other versus imposing one's own identity. Okay, so that is what you need to do when you identify conflicts. Okay, what is it that moves the action forward? The conflict has that is that which causes the protagonist to move forward. If there wasn't a conflict, there wouldn't be any problem, and the protagonist wouldn't do anything. No, theme, not with theme. Associate conflict with struggle. And Maria Soledad, can we use narrator and storyteller as synonyms? They are not exactly a synonym. They are not exactly synonyms, but I am aware that Johnstone uses them interchangeably without much precision. The storyteller is the flesh and bone human being that tells the story. The storyteller is the flesh and bone person who is in a concrete interaction with others and tells a story. The narrator is a voice. That's why you can have stories that are told by a first-person narrator or by an omniscient narrator. I'm sure you studied this in your literary courses. The same human being.
Yes, I know that they are not exactly. Sorry.
Okay.
I know that they are not exactly the same, but when I read the paper, I saw they were used as synonyms. That's why I was thinking about this. But the narrator is inside the story, right? It's like
or
within
not,
the
not
story?
necessarily. Not necessarily. There may be narrators that coincide with the character in the story. So narrator and character are the same. Okay? But the narrator, for example, in an omniscient narrator may not necessarily be in the story and is looking at the story world from outside, as if he or she was God looking at us doing things. Okay?
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Okay. We think of narrator as a voice, and normally the voice that you get in stories of personal experience is a first-person voice or a first-person narrator. Okay. Okay, guys. Then the other thing you need to consider when you're considering stories and narratives in general, not just stories of personal experience, but also narratives of habitual events and narratives of hypothetical events, is what function they can perform when it comes to arguing. So let's talk about arguing. What does it mean to say that somebody is arguing? No peleándose con otro, sino argumentando. En español tenemos dos verbos diferentes, pero en inglés tenemos solo uno. Entonces hay que distinguir. Cuando usamos argue, acá técnicamente lo que estamos queriendo decir es construir un argumento. So, to argue involves defending an idea, which we call, the idea that is defended is called thesis or argumentative position. Okay? Now, let me give you an example.
Sorry, before you move on, the stance is the same as the thesis?
No, but we will get there.
Okay.
But it's good that from now on you make a distinction between stance and argumentative position and thesis, because they're not the same. But we will get there, Sophia. Just a little patience. Now, let's imagine that the idea that I defend is smoking should be forbidden or must be forbidden altogether. If I present that idea as my thesis that I would like others to accept, if I present it just like that, it would be very difficult for me to get others to accept or to endorse that idea. So what I should do is offer some support. Support for the thesis or support for the argumentative position. For example, I could say something like, smoking should be banned altogether because smoking causes serious health problems. So now there are two ideas. Smoking should be banned and smoking causes serious health problems. Which of these two ideas is the thesis that I defend? Smoking should be banned. Excellent. And because it causes serious health problems is the support for that thesis. Okay? I forgot to add another term. You can call this the thesis, the argumentative position, or claim. Okay? These are three synonyms: thesis, claim, argumentative position. So the second idea, in my example, the second idea functions as support for the thesis. Now,
sorry, but in that case, because it causes health problems, it's not a narrative, right?
No, we're talking about we're talking about argumentation in itself, explaining the basics first. We're explaining the basics first. Then you will see that one narrative, one whole narrative of personal experience or of hypothetical events or of habitual events can function as support for one thesis in itself. Okay, but let me work out with the basics and with smaller things first. Okay, so notice that there is a connector between the two ideas. I said smoking should be banned because, connector, it causes health problems. There is a connector that indicates cause-consequence, right? The consequence is smoking should be banned, and the cause is it causes serious health problems, right? These relationship between these two ideas can exist with or without the connector being used there. I can say something like, smoking causes serious health problems. It should be banned. And still you understand that in this case, the first idea, smoking causes serious health problems, is the cause for the second idea. It should be banned, right? Now, you understand that there is a connection between these two ideas. These two ideas are explicit. They are made explicit in a text. But there is another idea that you need in order to understand that there is a connection between smoking should be banned and smoking causes health problems. There is another idea that is not expressed. an idea that is so general, so common sense, that we don't usually express that. That idea is something very general. It's like a principle that we all take for granted. The idea is there. Things that cause health problems should be banned. Notice how general that is. And notice how common sense that is. And I'm sure that most people that are connected here should say, that's true. I'm not saying everybody should agree with me. I'm saying most people would find that acceptable, right? Now, this general idea is called general principle or assumption. Okay? So in an argument, what you get is at least these three parts. A very general idea that is not expressed, but we assume that we share. Things that cause health problems should be banned. Then there is some support or evidence. Smoking causes health problems. If you accept the very first general principle that is not expressed, and if you accept the evidence or the support, chances are you will find my conclusion acceptable. So if you accept that things that cause health problems should be banned, if you accept smoking causes health problems, then you accept my conclusion, or you are very likely to accept my conclusion. If my conclusion is smoking should be banned. All right? Now, in discourse that is produced every day among people interacting, people argue in the sense that they connect propositions and they form chains of reasoning, chains of propositions that are connected in different ways. For example, in a cause-consequence relationship, or there may be opposition relationships between ideas. And why do they do that? Why do they form chains of reasoning? Because the acceptability of an argument is conditioned by how acceptable the support is, how acceptable the evidence that you give is, and how they are well connected. Okay? There's a question here. How is the general assumption different from a thesis, Saida? Because the general assumption is generally not expressed, and what is expressed is the proposition that is defended by the text producer, and that is what you call the thesis or the claim. And exactly, the general assumption is very general, and the thesis is more specific than the general assumption. The general assumption is so general, like I said, that we take it for granted, and in normal circumstances, when we argue, we don't express it. Now, doxa. Well, those general assumptions, those general principles that we take for granted are part of what is called the doxa. Okay? Yes. You don't need to learn about doxa, however, Valentina, don't worry. Don't worry. If you're able to detect general principles that underlie a reasoning, that's more than good enough. Agustina says, you said that there are 3 parts in an argument: the general principle, support, and the claim, thesis, or argumentative position. That's the 3rd element that is missing in your question. Okay, guys. So when text producers are reasoning and producing an argument, that is to say, when they want their claim to be accepted by their interlocutors, they establish all sorts of connections and combinations between ideas. For example, they may present a cause-consequence chain, and then in the middle, they realize that there may be some disadvantage, so they establish a contrast or an opposition, and then they may establish an analogy between 2 ideas, and that's how you and your interlocutors reason, guys, and argue. So let me give you an example. Imagine somebody asks you about a movie that you watched lately. And you can say, you are going to love this movie. You must watch this movie. The acting is superb. The setting is beautiful. Now, having said that, the music is not well suited, however. It's like the music of a bad horror movie, you know? But I think the acting is so powerful that even though the actors are not well known, the movie is an absolute work of art. You must watch it. Did you pay attention to how complex that was? I started with the thesis, you must watch the movie. And then I offered some support in the form of cause-consequence. The acting is superb, the setting is beautiful. But then I realized that there was something that was not good. So I said, having said that, opposition. The music is not well suited. It's like the music of a bad horror movie. It's like the music of a bad horror movie. Analogy. So I started with cause-consequence, then opposition, change of direction, then like, analogy, and then, but I think the acting is so powerful that the movie is a work of art. So again, another change of direction, another opposition, but, and then cause-consequence, the acting is so powerful that consequence, the movie is a work of art. Guys, that is the sort of thing you do when you talk. So you need to be ready to detect how ideas are connected. Is this a cause-consequence relationship here? Is there an analogy here between these 2 ideas? Is there opposition between these 2 propositions? And notice that what you can form is a chain. Cause-consequence, 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 and then opposition, change of direction, and then back to cause-consequence, and then maybe analogy. All sorts of connections, all right? So what you need to be alert to is connectors. Connectors are very important. However, connectors, like I said, are not essential. Propositions may be related even if there are no connectors. So what you need is not just paying attention to connectors. What you need is reading and interpretation skills. How is this idea related to the other idea? Next class, we will do some analyses so that you get trained into detecting these cause-consequence, opposition, and analogies. Each particular step that is taken in this chain of reasoning, each particular step is called an argumentative move, un movimiento argumentativo. So each local step, for example, you're going to love this movie. The acting is superb. That is an argumentative move of cause-consequence. The consequence is you're going to love the movie. The cause is the acting is superb. Then there is an argumentative move of analogy. The music is not well suited. It's like the music of a bad horror movie. Like. Comparison. That is an argumentative move of analogy. And then you get, but I think that the acting is so good that you're going to love the movie. But opposition, that is an argumentative move of opposition. Why do we call them moves? Because this is like playing a game of chess. Each player moves a piece at a time, step by step by step. This is something simple. When you argue, you're reasoning, and you connect one idea to another idea to another idea, step by step by step. Okay? So guys, next time we meet, and this in part answers Saida's question. Next time we meet, we're gonna see if there are questions about the homework assignments that you're gonna have. We're gonna do some practice identifying argumentative moves of different sorts in different texts. And we will start Unit 3, okay, with the very first paper, the paper on identities. Okay? And Saida, so that answers one of your questions. The other question is, the term test is planned for the 3rd week in June. Okay? And then your homework assignment is, let's recap that. You have a question about text type and genres. Don't forget that. Then you will have a mini analysis of a narrative in the form of a questionnaire, like the questionnaire you've just done, okay? So as you're doing the questionnaire, you will get the correct answers, and if you have questions about the answers, you can ask next class. Then you will have a very, very short narrative. You will work individually on that, and we have prepared questions for you to answer about that text. And then there is a longer text for analysis, and you're going to work in groups on the longer text, okay? You will have to apply the concepts that you've read, and if there is any concept that you read, you didn't understand, and the instructions require that you apply it, then don't worry, because we have next class to ask questions and to solve whatever thing you don't understand. Okay? So maybe in a couple of hours, we will be uploading the missing feedback to some of the teams. There is a team that I wanted to talk to. The team, wait a second, bear with me. where is it? Ferrer, Hernandez, Loza, Semencu, Vizar. If any of these students are here in the session, please don't log off. Stay connected because I'd like to talk to you. So like I said, later we're going to upload the missing feedback. And